So what I will try to do during the next 10 minutes is to walk you through the European Union's approach to blockchain and blockchain regulation. I will start with the political agenda, and then I will move on to the infrastructural level, and then I will tell you a little bit about some regulations that might be of interest to those of you working on blockchain. So first, on the political agenda, the European Union claims themselves to be an aspiring leader in blockchain and Web3 technology, becoming a major innovator in blockchain and a home to significant platforms, applications, and companies. But we have to take into account that the blockchain strategy of the European Union relies on some pillars that I have said here. Most of them, I would say, are pretty self-explanatory, and you would be familiar with them. But I would like to mention two aspects, which are that each blockchain application, product, or service should comply with environmental sustainability and environmental regulation, and also with data protection regulation and principles. And these are two aspects that are particularly interesting when we are dealing with blockchain technology. So I encourage you also to carry on some research on this. I would be also open to discuss in the future, because I think more research is needed on this side, because blockchain actually presents some interesting challenges on these two fronts. Then if we move on to the infrastructural levels, there are two initiatives that I would like to highlight. The first one is the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure, which is basically the European public sector pan-European blockchain infrastructure. And the idea with this infrastructure is also to enhance it and build it more in the future to try to achieve interoperability with other platforms. And I think this would be particularly interesting for digital identity schemes, but also for other applications. There is also the creation of this European EDIC, which is a legal entity established actually with the goal to support the EPSI, the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure. Now, if we move on to the regulatory level, I will analyze 4 different regulations that I think might be interesting for those of you working on blockchain. And the first one is the MiCA, the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation. Sorry for the long name, but you know we are lawyers, we like long and complicated things. But basically this regulation covers crypto assets not currently regulated by existing financial services legislation. And this would be particularly important in the next slide. But I would say now for the moment that the key provisions of this regulation cover transparency, disclosure, authorization, and supervision of transactions. So a very well established regime for this kind of transaction. But the idea of this regulation is basically to put consumer in the center, but at the same time not giving up innovation and stability and market integrity. The second regulation is the pilot regime for market infrastructures based on distributed ledger technology. And what's interesting about this regulation is that, as I mentioned before, there are many blockchain applications that follow under financial regulation. But the problem or the thing is that actually when the financial regulations came to life, they were not, regulators did not have blockchain in mind. This usually happens with regulating technology in the European Union. Regulator comes behind innovation. So that's the reason why actually the regulator thought that this regulation could be a good attempt, especially because it allows for exceptions from existing rules. And the idea here is to foster innovation and to help or enhance regulators and companies to test innovative solutions using blockchain. So I would say it's a very funny also regulation to play with. And also in the same line, the European Union launching the European Blockchain Sandbox Initiative. It's been running for some years now, and I invite you also to check it because it could be also an interesting playground for blockchain applications. The third regulation, and now we are moving a little bit away from finance, is the Data Act. And the Data Act's goal is to enable fair distribution of the value of data by establishing clear and fair rules for accessing and using data in the European data economy. And basically, again, this regulation was brought to light taking into account or taking in mind IoT, Internet of Things application. But what is interesting here is that in the regulation, it contemplates that IoT providers and third-party recipients will need to enter into a data sharing agreement to regulate the different data flows. And in this case, what it makes this regulation particularly interesting for people working in blockchain is that it includes the option to use smart contracts for this purpose. And for the first time, this was a pivotal moment because smart contracts were regulated by the European Union for data sharing agreements. So even though this regulation, the main purpose of this regulation is not regulate blockchain technologies, it's the first time that we have legal conditions for establishing smart contracts. And finally, the last regulation is the European Digital Identity Framework. So as you all know, digital identity schemes are flourishing all over the world, and the European Union is not an exception. So actually, member states are encouraged to adopt more and more digital identity frameworks. The idea is to use these frameworks first in member states, but also to make them interoperable so they can be data exchanges all over the European Union. And the purposes are many. So the idea is to have access to your health data, financial data, but also all kind of data that you can imagine. So basically driving licenses, diploma, and many other things. So the interesting part here, or where blockchain comes into scene, I would say, is that the regulation expands the scope of trust services to include recording of electronic data in an electronic ledger. So again, the European Union is trying to accommodate blockchain technologies as very interesting options, in this case, for the case of digital identity schemes. And these were all the regulations that I was planning to analyze. Maybe the kind of blockchain applications that you are working on will fall in an ad hoc regulation, as could be the case of MiCA, or maybe they will be regulated in the scope of a broader regulation, a financial regulation, a digital identity regulation, or for instance, the European Data Protection Regulation, which I not mentioned here out of time constraints, but yesterday, for instance, my colleague Marco Botta spoke about the European Data Protection Board's document on the intersection between blockchain and data protection. But I would like you to leave this talk with a very simple idea, which is that blockchain technology is in the target of the European Union, and honestly, I think it's a good timing to expect more interesting things to come. Thank you very much.